can separate us from the love of Christ? Dear brothers and sisters, one of the movies which made waves across the world was The Passion of Christ by the Oscar-winning Hollywood actor and director Mel Gibson. This movie is about the last 12 hours in the life of Jesus Christ. The dialogue of the movie is in Aramaic, the language spoken by Jesus, and Latin spoken by the Romans, with subtitles in English. The 126 minutes long movie depicts the torture of Jesus both by the Jewish and the Roman authorities, and the relentless violence and bloodshed endured by Jesus, all for the sake of the redemption of humankind. The common reaction after watching the movie is either deep, remorseful silence on the part of the audience or tear-stained cheeks, as one commented. No matter what you are, whether you believe in Jesus or not, you'll begin to love Jesus, who suffered so much for you. In today's second reading, St. Paul throws two challenging questions before his listeners. One, if God is for us, who can be against us? And the second, can anything separate us from the love of Christ? Romans chapter 8 verses 31 to 39. To begin with, let's try to understand what is the love of Christ that St. Paul is referring to. St. Paul seems to have well understood the manifestations of love of Christ in different situations. At Christmas, the love of Christ emptied himself. Having given up his divinity, Jesus came down to live with us as a human being. Philippians chapter 2 verses 6 to 8. Therefore, he is Emmanuel, God with us. The love of Christ is compassion towards those who are hungry and thirsty, leading to multiplication of loaves and feeding the hungry, which we read in today's Gospel, Matthew chapter 14 verses 13 to 21. The love of Christ is liberation from the power of Satan and making the person walk free as a child of God. Mark chapter 5 verses 1 to 17. The love of Christ is mercy and forgiveness toward the wasteful son, and restoring him is a sonship. Gospel of Luke chapter 15 verses 11 to 32. And the love of Christ is service and humility, bending down and washing the feet of his disciples. John chapter 13 verses 1 to 17. And finally, the love of Christ is self-giving on the cross in order to give us life. John chapter 19 verse 30. Therefore, if we have understood the love of Christ and if we have experienced it for ourselves, Paul tells us that no force on earth can take us away from the love of Christ. After his conversion, Paul was totally a transformed man. He was convinced of his deep friendship and union with Christ, which he claimed, it is not I who live, but Christ lives in me, Galatians chapter 2 verse 20. This conviction, coupled with his experience of facing various challenges and difficulties he endured during his missionary journeys, which he summarizes thus: 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes, 3 times I was beaten with rods, once I was pelted with stones, 3 times I was shipwrecked, I spent a night and a day in the open sea, I have been constantly on the move, I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from the bandits, in danger from my own fellow Jews, in danger from the Gentiles, in danger at sea, and in danger in the country, and in the danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst, and I have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressures of my concern for all churches. 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verses 24 to 33. He asks his listeners, can tribulation, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, or danger, or sword separate us from the love of Christ? Then he himself answers the question saying, no, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loves us. Romans chapter 8 verse 37. Hence, for Paul, there is no force on earth that can really take us from the love of Christ. But you and I know our reality is different today. Our love for Christ is still very shallow. There are three distinct forces on this earth that constantly wage war against us and try to cut us off from the love of Christ. First, the world with all its allurements today seems to tell us life is meant for enjoyment. We offer you all that you need in life. Buy our products and have fun and relax. Don't bother about good and evil. Just enjoy. The second force is the flesh or the carnal nature in us, which easily gets tempted to momentary pleasures and then gets addicted to these pleasures, such as alcohol, drugs, pornography, gambling, etc. Once we get addicted, we become slaves to these pleasures and we lose control over our life. Then we fail to get to the Lord who alone can give us lasting happiness. This is how a number of our youth have gone away from the church as well as from Christ. St. Paul warns us in these words, the mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law. Romans chapter 8 verse 7. And the third force is the devil and his army who look for an opportunity to take us away from the love of Christ. The work of the devil is to sow the seeds of fear and doubt in our minds so that we stop believing in Christ. Take for example, from the time of the outbreak of COVID-19, some have been angry with God and even silent all the while. Why God is not doing anything when thousands of people are dying every day from the infection of coronavirus? The devil who puts these thoughts in the minds of the weak Christians manages to get the weak Christians on his side. They submit themselves to the devil and give up on Christ. So the real test of our love for Christ is seen when circumstances and situations of life are against us. When one after another calamities fall on us, we are tempted to abandon our faith. Dear brothers and sisters, in the midst of this pandemic we are facing last 4 months or more, let us not lose our faith. Rather, allow ourselves to be challenged by the argument of St. Paul as he asks, if God has given us his only Son, Jesus Christ, the most treasured possession he had, in order to give us life, then he will not allow us to be separated from the love of Christ. He will give us strength to bear our suffering and to hold on to our faith in Christ Jesus, because our strength comes from his love for us. Let me conclude my reflections with this inspirational quote. Feed your faith and your fears will starve to death. When dearth of faith lets the storms of life weigh us down, a leap of faith alone will stamp them out. Debbie McCombore.